Welcome back to the Dairy Knowledge Exchange. I'm Pat Colley, and I'm excited to share a fresh initiative we're launching in 2025 here at D&D Ingredients. Each month, we'll bring an educational webinar on this platform, spotlighting timely industry topics and featuring one of our valued partner products. Make sure to visit the D&D website regularly to explore these new learning opportunities.
Well, hello, I'm Dr. Connie Larson. I'm one of the research nutritionists at ZinPro Corporation, and it's my pleasure to spend the next 20 minutes with you in this recorded presentation talking about building a better animal with ZinPro Performance Minerals. So to give you an overshot of what we're going to do, we're going to talk about why minerals, we're going to differentiate ZinPro from other mineral sources, and we're going to wrap up showing what type of health and performance benefits our animals experience when we feed ZinPro minerals. So for your customers, when they are thinking about their specific livestock species or poultry, they know that nutrition matters. And what I'd really like them to understand is while they're focusing on protein and energy, we have to have those balanced, but minerals take up a very small portion of the diet, but they have a really big impact. And so, why do we think about trace minerals? And it's for health and performance. You can see in this graph that when we have adequate and we start to slide down in marginal deficiencies, the first thing that's compromised is immunity and health of those animals, and subsequently poor performance. And this doesn't happen when they hit rock bottom deficient, but it's starting to happen even in those marginal imbalances. And the reason we think about minerals is I probably can't talk about many things that happen within these animals that don't somehow have a tie to trace minerals. So they truly are important across all aspects of health and performance. And we focus predominantly on zinc, manganese, copper, and cobalt in ruminant species. So let me get started about talking about your customers having choices when it comes to trace minerals. They certainly have organic minerals that they can select from, or inorganic, which I refer to as being standard ordinary minerals such as sulfates, chlorides, and oxides. However, when they select ZinPro minerals, they're selecting a technology essentially, where we have our metal bound to a single amino acid. And that makes it unique. And we will understand in the next few slides why that is so important and why they are essentially different from these other sources. So in order to do that, I'm going to take you deep inside the animal into the small intestine, and you see a cartoon here of a single villi. And when we feed inorganic minerals, in this case, when it gets to that small intestine in the digesta, it actually has to release that zinc ion so it can find the appropriate transporter, which is then going to lock onto that zinc and bring it across the cell and deliver it into the bloodstream. Did you notice that little green triangle that popped onto that zinc ion? Well, that's because zinc can't be left alone by itself in the body. It has to have a carrier protein or an escort. So I'm going to take a moment and set the stage, and I'm going to make this analogy to a concert. Have you ever gone to a concert? And we're going to start in the beginning when you had to purchase your ticket, and I'm going to go back to this example. Now, purchasing that ticket, you may or may not get the ticket. And that's the same as this zinc product in an inorganic form getting there. It may or may not get in. The next thing that happens is you probably waited in line because you had a general admission ticket. Once you were in the concert, you really hoped you had a great seat and that the people around you didn't interfere with your experience. It's all kind of risky, and there's a lot of things that could happen to make that be a not so stellar experience as you had hoped for. But instead of general admission, I don't know if anybody that's watching this recording has actually been through a VIP entrance. And that's what I'm going to equate ZinPro minerals to. Now, I personally haven't had a VIP entrance, but what I imagine is I show up in a nice car. I have no lines. I'm escorted through my own entry into the concert. I have a great space. I'm thinking a suite, and I'm there with other people that are all enhancing the experience. And so the VIP entrance, as we look at this, is actually that amino acid transporter. And I hope you can see this little molecule that popped up on your screen. And that's what, if I were to draw this out for you, what Avela zinc would look like. I'm using zinc as my example, but keep in mind manganese and copper are the same. What you'll notice is on the lower left-hand side, that R, and that's important. That R is a signature for what that amino acid is. And so when we look at Avela zinc coming in, it's looking for that very specific amino acid transporter, and it's the R that is kind of like a key that fits into the lock of that transporter to bring it into the body. Now, notice it kept its amino acid as its way to transport through the body. And we think this is the key to why these minerals are more effectively and efficiently absorbed and why they are delivered to the target tissue more rapidly. So before I leave this, I want to take a moment and talk about two competitive categories of organic trace minerals. So in order to be organic, the metal has to be bound to something that contains carbon. So proteonates have a bunch of amino acids bound to a single metal. But when you add more than one, you disrupt how stable that zinc stays bound. You don't really have a way to get it in because it's looking for that single transporter. And so essentially that zinc comes off of the proteonate and comes through the transporter, really no different than what we see with the inorganic sources. On the other end of the spectrum for competitive products, we could think about glycinates. So if you look at that molecule of Avela zinc bound to its amino acid, glycinates are still a 1-to-1, sometimes 2-to-1, sometimes 3-to-1 amino acids, and they're all glycine. The challenge with glycine is it does not have that R. So if you take that R away, it doesn't have a way to be readily identified by the transporter. It's not an essential amino acid. The body's not necessarily looking for it. And think about it as being the last kid picked for the soccer team. So it really isn't very effective in bringing about the animal health and performance responses that we're looking for as we bring ZinPro minerals into the body. So that first part is simply getting it into the body. Secondly, it's the metabolism, or what do we see when it gets used by the body? And for me, understanding this first part of the presentation is important, but truly, I always say the animals are the proof that it gets used by the body and it's effective. So let's think about ZinPro as a company a little bit different. Don't think of it as just a mineral company, but one that brings mineral technology that delivers performance and animal health. So I like to think of us more of as performance and animal health company, and we're going to start with the animal health perspective. So to begin with, epithelial tissue is our first line of defense. Think about it as the skin. Think about it as the lining of your gastrointestinal tract. Think about the lining of your respiratory tract and your reproduction tract. And what this tissue is going to do is we want the cells to stay very intact so it can keep the bad things out and let the right things in. We don't want those cells to come apart and get leaky, so to speak. So let's look at what are some evidence that ZinPro minerals do a really good job of this. And we're looking at some intestinal samples on the right. The top one is healthy. And the bottom one is mad. It's inflamed. It's not functioning as well. And so when we fed pigs either Avela zinc in the feed or a zinc sulfate, what we found is the lesion prevalence when they were exposed to Lawsonia went from 100% down to 33%. We had better tissue, better able to combat the challenge. The severity score of those lesions dropped from 1.3 to zero point 0.3. It basically said we gave that animal a better chance in the face of disease. Now, I like this slide. If you put your focus to the right-hand side, those are tissue slices of those villi. And all those little red dots you see are immune cells that have been called to the battle. They're there because there's an invasion of a bacteria. In this case, it was Lawsonia. And you can simply, with your eyes, note that on the top picture, there's a lot more of the army showing up than on the bottom picture. And that's what the graph is saying. We have a lot more of these T cells, immune cells, coming in to help this animal in the face of a challenge earlier than what we see when we feed just standard inorganic minerals. If we move into horses and we talk about the stomach, and horse owners are concerned about gastric ulcers. This is a healthy stomach. Here is a very inflamed, worst case scenario gastric ulcer. And when we feed a combination of ZinPro minerals, we have better tissue that are better able to fight against gastric ulcers setting up. So we had a 50% reduction in gastric ulcer score, number, and severity. So the horse was really in a better state of health in the face of gastric ulcers. Let's move into the respiratory tract. I talked about that as being lined with epithelial tissue. And again, a really nice cartoon showing the cells. Keep in mind, we want to keep those tight junctions tight. We want those immune cells to be able to reach up and sense what you see, looking for what kind of things do I have to protect against. So in this case, we took birds and exposed them to a respiratory virus, IBV. And 10 days later, we measure how much air sacculitis is occurring. And that's a negative outcome when you have the disease. And so when we fed Avela Zinc, we decreased that negative response by 75%. So again, maintaining better tissue, better health of those animals. If we move down to the feet, we're still talking about epithelial tissue. I've got a swine example here, but we know healthy feet are a foundation for success in performance of animals. And whether we're talking about claws, paws, pads, hooves, that tissue, that epithelial tissue, is transformed into something much harder and much better for locomotion of those animals. And so if I look at a cross species section and a multitude of summaries from a depth of data, what we find in dairy cattle, we reduce lameness 35%. For beef cattle, we reduce infectious disease of foot rot by 30%. For poultry, we reduce lameness by 29%, and swine claw lesions are decreased by 29%. So really quickly, your mind goes to, hey, there's a simple number here, 30% improvement when we feed ZinPro minerals for setting a foundation for success for healthy claws, paws, pads, and hooves. I'm going to move into another aspect of immunity. And now I'm going to talk about colostrum, because we know many of our species, colostrum is highly important for best starts in our offspring. In horses, when we fed a combination of ZinPro minerals compared to all inorganics, we saw a 40% increase in the protective factors in that colostrum, which then equated to those foals consuming that colostrum to having 65% more of those protective factors circulating in their blood at 24 hours. And I could take more time if we had it and walk through pigs, sheep, goats, other ruminants, in addition to the horses, all areas where we have shown that we improve colostrum by feeding the female in late gestation. So a very positive response, very consistent. How about vaccinations? We know that a lot of producers, horse owners, pet owners are going to be concerned about their vaccination programs, and rightfully so. And I love this illustration with swine. When we had a control group that had just inorganic zinc and we did not vaccinate them, they had an 8.3% mortality rate to a specific disease. When we fed that same ordinary mineral and vaccinated them, we saw a vaccine response. We reduced mortality to 5.6%. But look what happens when we bring in ZinPro minerals and have the vaccine. We're much more effective and efficient. So we make the vaccine response greater and we see a reduction down to just 1.1% mortality. So a huge response to that vaccine and for that producer's profitability. This is in horses, showing what a curve would look like when we inoculate horses on day 0 and we follow it out the next 21 days. We see that we have higher antibodies in response. So that just tells me we have that animal. It's kind of like an insurance policy. We have that animal protected to the best of our ability, and the immune system is functioning as it should. So we've done a quick dive into health. How about we look at summaries of data across species for what kind of performance do we see? And I'm going to start with beef cattle. And we have 3 numbers we talk about when we feed Avalifort at our recommended level to the cow herd. The first is a 20% reproductive improvement. And what does that mean to us? That means that we have a 20% improvement in bull semen characteristics. That sperm is more fertile in getting females bred. When we look at first service retention, or I should have said first service preg rates in our heifers and our cows, that number goes up. More calves born early, more weaning weight at the end. A 28% improvement in colostrum quality. And by the way, that weaning weight on the average is about 28 pounds more than if we had just fed a standard inorganic mineral. If I move into birds, and we're looking at breeder performance now, and so if we kind of tag on to some of the story we just heard about beef cattle, we can also improve breeder performance in birds. And this comes with a 13-to-1 increase in ROI simply by decreasing cracked eggs, building a better eggshell, and increasing that hatchability and chick livability by 1.8%. So moving the needle for better health, better performance, better profitability. What about broilers? And what about meat production? So I could show you a graph of 63 comparisons of looking at ZinPro zinc to inorganic zinc. And what you would see a consistent response in more breast meat yield. What we get with that, because we don't drive dry matter intake to get that yield, we're more efficient, we have better improvement. 2 points is a big deal in the poultry industry. And you can see that that is all supported by some of the same things we just talked about. Strengthened epithelial tissue, reduced skin lesions, and reduced lameness. So health drives performance. How about pigs? This is a very robust data set with 3,200 pigs in each treatment, ZinPro minerals versus inorganics. And we increased the full value of those pigs by 2.2%. And really looking at don't make mortality, don't make that lack of health response your cost of doing gain. And so again, just looking at each of these species a little bit differently. How about dairy? And looking at the use of Avail dairy. It's a combination of different ZinPro minerals. And what we see across this robust data set is a 28% improvement in colostrum. So our ruminant number, beef and dairy, is a 28% improvement. We lower somatic cell count by 20%. We increase pregnancy by 5.5% within that percentage units. And we have greater feed efficiency because we consistently seeing these cows produce more milk. Now, I'm going to include with a personal passion of mine, which is horses. And in keeping them in the top of their game, we don't always have that economic factor, but we know there's a deep emotional factor in wanting to keep these horses at the top of their game. And we start with the foot. And so that show that when we feed ZinPro minerals, we increase sole depth. We increase the integrity and functionality of the sole of that foot. When we look at hair, so in pets and in horses, we've shown hair responses that hair grows faster We also have shown that we get a shinier, more light is reflected, more pigmentation is coming through in the color of those animals. And that's true of all of our livestock species as well. When it comes down to bone and joints, we've evaluated the inflammatory response in the knee of some horses, some young horses, and we saw a very robust inflammatory response. And many people kind of question this, like, do we want a greater inflammatory response? And the answer is yes. If this is the first time that that's showing up, that's what the immune system is built to do. We want it to raise quickly because we want it to take care of business and come back down and avoid the chronic inflammation, which is, yes, that we want to lower chronic inflammation. Also, within that study, being able to see joint function recovery come back 60%, 63% faster is a very positive aspect for the horse owner. So, in conclusion, I hope that through this quick recording that you've been able to get a feeling for getting better health through nutrition, and that drives performance for whatever aspect of performance that we are looking for. And so I would encourage you, if you have any questions from this recording, please reach out to your local ZinPro representative. It's been my pleasure to spend this time with you on this recording.
Thanks for tuning in to the Dairy Knowledge Exchange. Don't forget to check our product page for featured products and promotions throughout the year. Connect with us on LinkedIn or share your thoughts and topic suggestions directly with me at pat@ddingredient.com. We look forward to hearing from you.